Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Great Expectations. He had so seated himself that he took out his handkerchief and wiped his hand and head and neck and hands before he could go on. Excuse me, again, this is the perspective of the convict. Let's return to his voice again.
I'd said to Compeyson that I'd smash that face of his, and I swore Lord smash mine, to do it. We was in the same prison ship, but I couldn't get at him for long, though I tried. At last I come behind him and hit him on the cheek, to turn him round and get a smashing one at him. When I was seen and seized, the black hole of that ship weren't a strong one. To a judge of black holes I could swim and dive. I escaped to the shore, and I was hiding among the graves there, envying them as was in all over, when I first seen my boy. He regarded me with a look of affection that made him almost abhorrent to me again, though I felt great pity for him. By my boy, I was to give and understand his Compeyson was out on the marshes too. Upon my soul, I half believe he escaped in his terror, to get quit of me, not knowing it was me as had got ashore. I hunted him down. I smashed his face, and now, says I, as the worst thing I can do, caring nothing for myself, I'll drag you back. And I'd have swum off, toward him by the hair. If it had come to that, I had got him aboard without the soldiers. Of course, he'd much the best of it to the last. His character was so good. He had escaped when he was made half wild by me and my murderous intentions, and his punishment was light. I was put in irons, brought to trial again, and sent for life. I didn't stop for life, dear boy, and Pip's comrade, being here. He wiped himself again, as he had done before, and then slowly took his tango of tobacco from his pocket, and plucked his pipe from his buttonhole, and slowly filled it, and began to smoke. Is he dead? I asked after a silence. Is who dead, dear boy? Compeyson. He hopes I'm alive. If he's alive, you may be sure with a fierce look, I ne'er heard no more of him. Herbert had been writing with his pencil.
Yes, I think that is the end of the perspective of the voice of the convict, who is now helping Pip. Herbert had been writing with his pencil in the cover of a book. He softly pushed the book over to me, as Provis stood smoking with his eyes on the fire, and I read in it. Young Havisham's name was Arthur. Compeyson is the man who professed to be Miss Havisham's lover. I shut the book and nodded slightly to Herbert, and put the book by. But we neither of us said anything, and both looked at Provis as he stood smoking by the fire. Chapter 43. Why should I pause to ask how much of my shrinking from Provis might be traced to Estella? Why should I loiter on my road to compare the state of mind in which I had tried to rid myself of the stain of the prison before meeting her at the coach office, with the state of mind in which I now reflected on the abyss between Estella, in her pride and beauty, and then returned transport, whom I harbored? The road would be none the smoother for it. The end would be none the better for it. He would not be helped, nor I extenuated. A new fear had been endangered in my mind by his narrative, or rather, his narrative had given form and purpose to the fear that was already there. If Compeyson were alive and should discover his return, I can hardly doubt the consequence, that Compeyson stood in mortal fear of him. Neither of the two could know much better than I, and that any such man as that man had been described to be would hesitate to release himself for good from a dreaded enemy by the safe means of becoming an informer was scarcely to be imagined. Never had I breathed, and never would I breathe, or so I resolved, a word of Estella to Provis. But I said to Herbert that before I could go abroad, I must see both Estella and Miss Havisham, This was when we were left alone on the night of the day when Provis told us his story. I resolved to go out to Richmond next day, and I went. On my presenting myself at Mrs. Brandley's, Estella's maid was called to tell that Estella had gone into the country. Where? To Sata's house, as usual. Not as usual, I said, for she had never yet gone there without me. When was she coming back? There was an air of reservation in the answer, which my increased perplexity, and the answer was that her maid believed she was only coming back at all for a little while. I could make nothing of this, except that it was meant that I should make nothing of it, and I went home again in complete discomfiture. Another night consultation with Herbert, after Provis was gone home. I always took him home, and always looked well about me, led us to the conclusion that nothing should be said about going abroad until I came back from Miss Havisham's. In the meantime, Herbert and I were to consider separately what it would be best to say, whether we should devise any pretense of being afraid that he was under suspicious observation, or whether I, who had never yet been abroad, should propose an expedition. We both knew that I had but to propose anything, and he would consent. We agreed that his remaining many days in his present hazard was not to be thought of. Next day, I had the meanness to feign that I was under a blinding promise to go down to Joe, but I was capable of almost any meanness toward Joe or his name. Provis was to be strictly careful while I was gone, and Herbert was to take the charge of him that I had taken. I was to be absent only one night, and, on my return, the gratification of his impatience for my starting as a gentleman on a greater scale was to be begun. It occurred to me then, and as I afterwards found to Herbert also, that he might be best got away across the water, or that pretense as to make purchases, or the like, on that pretense, Having thus cleared the way for my expedition to Miss Havisham's, I set off by the early morning coach, before it was yet light, and was out on the open country road when the day came creeping on, halting and whimpering, and shivering, and wrapped in patches of cloud and rags of mist, like a beggar. When we drove up to the Blue Boar, after a drizzly ride, whom should I come out under the gateway, toothpick in hand, to look at the coach, but Bentley Drummle. As he pretended not to see me, I pretended not to see him. It was a very lame pretense on both sides. The lamer, because we both went into the coffee room, where he had just finished his breakfast, and where I ordered mine. It was poisonous to me to see him in the town, for I very well knew why he had come there, pretending to read a smeary newspaper long out of date, which had nothing half so legible in its local news as the foreign matter of coffee, pickles, fish sauces, gravy, melted butter, and wine, with which it was sprinkled all over, as if it had taken the measles in a highly irregular form. I sat at my table while he stood before the fire. By degrees it became an enormous injury to me that he stood before the fire, and I got up, determined to have my share of it. I had to put my hand behind his legs for the poker, when I went up to the fireplace to stir the fire, but still pretended not to know him.
"Is this a cut?"
said Mr. Drummle.
"Oh,"
said I, poker in hand.
"it's you, is it? How do you do? I was always wondering who it was, who kept the fire off."
With that, I poked tremendously, and having done so, planted myself side by side with Mr. Drummle, my shoulders squared and my back to the fire.
"You've just come down,"
said Mr. Drummle, edging me a little way with his shoulder.
"Yes,"
said I, edging him a little way with my shoulder.
"Beastly place,"
said Drummle.
"You're part of the country, I think."
Yes, I assented.
"I'm told it's very like your Shropshire." "Not in the least like it,"
said Drummle. Here Mr. Drummle looked at his boots, and I looked at mine, And then Mr. Drummer looked at my boots, and I looked at his. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care. And thanks again.